Ryan had always been the type of person who threw himself completely into his work. As an architect, he loved what he did. There was something incredibly satisfying about turning empty spaces into buildings, where people would live, work, and make memories. But lately, that passion had started consuming every hour of his day. His wife, Lisa, had been understanding about it. At least, that's what he told himself every time he stayed late at the office. It was a Thursday evening, and Ryan was buried in blueprints for a major project downtown. The city wanted to revitalize an old district, and his firm had won the contract. It was the biggest opportunity of his career, and he was determined to make every detail perfect. His colleague, Tom, sat across from him, pointing out measurements and discussing structural concerns. They'd been at it for hours, and Ryan's eyes were starting to blur from staring at the detailed drawings. The clock on the wall showed 9:47 p.m. when something unexpected happened. The office door opened slowly, without any knock or warning. Ryan looked up, slightly annoyed at the interruption. A woman walked in. She appeared to be in her 50s, dressed in a professional gray suit with her hair pulled back neatly. Ryan had never seen her before in his life. She wasn't a client, and she definitely wasn't anyone from his firm. What struck him most was the way she looked at him. It wasn't a casual glance. She stood there for what felt like an eternity, her eyes studying his face carefully, as if she was searching for something specific in his features. Ryan felt his stomach tighten. There was something about her expression that made him deeply uncomfortable. It wasn't hostile, but it carried a weight that made the air in the room feel heavier. Then she spoke. Her voice was calm but firm, leaving no room for argument. "We need to talk alone." Those 5 words changed everything. Ryan felt his heart start to race. Tom looked between them, clearly sensing that something serious was happening. Without asking any questions, Tom gathered his papers and left the room quickly, closing the door behind him. The click of the door latch sounded unusually loud in the sudden silence. The woman walked to the chair across from Ryan's desk and sat down with the confidence of someone who was used to difficult conversations. She reached into her bag and pulled out a large envelope, the kind you see in movies when someone's about to reveal something life-changing. She placed it on the desk and slid it across the polished surface toward him. "My name is Helen Torres," she said. "I'm a private investigator." Ryan's mind went blank for a moment. A private investigator? Why would a private investigator be looking for him? He hadn't done anything wrong. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the envelope. Helen nodded, indicating he should open it. Inside, he found photographs. Dozens of them, but they weren't pictures of him. They were pictures of Lisa. His wife died in every photo. Lisa was with a man Ryan didn't recognize. They were at restaurants, sitting close together. They were at hotels, walking and holding hands. In some pictures, they were shopping together, looking at luggage as if planning a trip. Each photo had a date and time stamp printed in the corner. Ryan's mind struggled to process what he was seeing. The dates were from the past several months, many of them on days when Lisa had told him she was visiting her sister in another city. Helen let him look through the photos in silence. When he finally looked up at her, his face must have shown his confusion and growing panic because she started explaining. Without him having to ask, she told him that she hadn't been hired to investigate Lisa. Her actual target was the man in the photographs. His name was Daniel Carter, and he was a criminal. Daniel had worked as a senior accountant for a large company, and he'd stolen over $2 million from them. Helen had been hired by the company to find him and recover the money, while following Daniel's movements and tracking his activities. Helen had discovered that he was involved with someone. Through weeks of surveillance, she'd identified that person as Lisa. The photos showed that they'd been meeting regularly for months, always when Ryan thought his wife was somewhere else. Helen explained that she couldn't yet determine Lisa's exact role in all of this. Was she an innocent woman who'd gotten involved with the wrong person? Or was she helping Daniel hide the stolen money? Ryan sat there, feeling like the floor had disappeared beneath him. This couldn't be real. Lisa was his college sweetheart. They'd been together for over a decade. They built a life together, bought a house in a quiet neighborhood, supported each other's careers, and talked about starting a family soon. She was the person he trusted most in the world. How could she be involved in something like this? Helen continued talking, her voice professional but not unkind. She said she needed Ryan's help. The company that hired her wanted their money back, and they wanted Daniel arrested. But if Ryan confronted Lisa now, if he showed any sign that he knew what was happening, it could ruin everything. Daniel might get spooked and disappear completely, taking Lisa with him. Helen needed Ryan to act normal, to pretend everything was fine. While she continued her investigation, she also needed access to information. Lisa's phone records, her computer, any documents or papers that might show where Daniel was hiding or planning to go next. Helen needed to understand if Lisa was a victim or a willing participant in the crime. And the only person who could help her get that information was Ryan. Ryan felt sick. His whole body felt numb. He'd come to work that morning thinking about building designs and client meetings. Now he was sitting here learning that his wife had been lying to him for months, possibly involved in a major crime. Helen stood up, preparing to leave. She handed him a business card with her phone number. She told him to go home, act normal, and call her tomorrow when he'd had time to think. But she emphasized that time was critical. Every day that passed gave Daniel more opportunity to vanish with the stolen money, and possibly with Lisa to dot. After Helen left, Ryan sat alone in his office for a long time. The blueprints on his desk, which had seemed so important an hour ago, now looked meaningless. He thought about Lisa at home, probably already asleep, completely unaware that her secrets had been discovered. Or maybe she wasn't asleep. Maybe she was awake, talking to Daniel, planning whatever they were planning together. Ryan finally gathered his things and drove home in a daze. Every stoplight seemed to last forever. Every turn reminded him of trips he'd taken with Lisa, memories that now felt tainted. When he pulled into their driveway, he sat in the car for several minutes, staring at their house. It was a beautiful home, painted a soft blue with white trim, surrounded by the garden Lisa had planted 2 years ago. It had always represented everything good in his life. Now it felt like a stranger's house. Ryan barely slept that night. He lay in bed next to Lisa, listening to her breathe peacefully while his mind raced through 1,000 thoughts. Every sound made him tense. When she shifted in her sleep, he wondered if she was really sleeping or just pretending. He studied her face in the dim light coming through the curtains, trying to see any sign of deception, any hint of the person Helen's photographs had revealed. But she just looked like Lisa, the woman he'd loved for so many years. Morning came too slowly and too quickly at the same time. Lisa woke up, smiled at him, and kissed his cheek before getting up to make coffee. It was their normal routine, something they'd done countless times. But everything felt different now. Ryan watched her move around their bedroom, getting dressed for work, and wondered how many times she'd done this exact same routine before going to meet Daniel. Instead of going to her law office, Ryan called his office and told them he was sick. It was the first time he'd called in sick in over 5 years. His boss sounded concerned and told him to take care of himself. If only he knew what was really wrong. After Lisa left for work, Ryan sat at their kitchen table with Helen's business card in his hand. He stared at the numbers for almost 20 minutes before finally making the call. They agreed to meet at a small coffee shop on the other side of town, far from anywhere Ryan or Lisa normally went. When he arrived, Helen was already there, sitting in a corner booth with her back to the wall. She had a laptop open and several folders spread across the table. Ryan ordered a coffee he didn't really want and sat down across from her. Helen didn't waste time. She opened one of the folders and showed him everything she'd gathered so far. Daniel Carter had worked for a company called Riverside Industries for 7 years. He'd been trusted, well-liked, and had access to the company's financial systems. 6 months ago, money started disappearing. Small amounts at first, transferred to accounts that seemed legitimate but were actually shells. Over time, the amounts grew larger. By the time anyone noticed something was wrong, Daniel had moved over $2 million into various offshore accounts. 3 weeks ago, Daniel stopped coming to work. His apartment was cleaned out. His car was found abandoned at a train station. The company realized they'd been robbed and that's when they hired Helen. She'd been tracking him ever since, following digital trails and financial records. That's how she discovered his connection to Lisa. Helen spread out more photographs on the table. These were taken at different locations over several months. She pointed to one taken at an expensive hotel downtown. The timestamp showed it was from a Tuesday afternoon, a day Ryan remembered clearly because Lisa had told him. She was attending a legal conference in Boston. Another photo showed Lisa and Daniel at a jewelry store, looking at expensive watches together. The date matched a weekend when Lisa had supposedly been visiting her elderly aunt. But the evidence went beyond just photographs. Helen had obtained phone records that showed hundreds of calls and text messages between Lisa and Daniel over the past year. She tracked Lisa's credit card statements and found charges at hotels, restaurants, and stores that Lisa had never mentioned. There were bank statements for an account Ryan didn't know existed, an account in Lisa's name with deposits totaling over $170,000. Ryan felt like he might throw up. Helen pushed a glass of water toward him and waited while he tried to process everything. When he could finally speak, his voice came out rough and unfamiliar. He asked the question that had been burning in his mind since the night before. Was Lisa a victim who'd gotten involved with a con artist? Or was she helping Daniel steal the money? Helen's answer wasn't what he wanted to hear. Based on the evidence, it appeared Lisa was actively involved. The money in her secret account had come from Daniel, but the deposits matched dates when large transfers had been made from the stolen funds. More concerning were emails Helen had recovered from Lisa's work computer. In them, Lisa and Daniel discussed offshore banking laws, countries with favorable tax regulations, and the best ways to move money without being detected. Lisa's legal knowledge was being used to structure the entire operation. Ryan put his head in his hands. This couldn't be happening. Helen gave him a moment before continuing. She explained that she needed his help to get more information. She needed access to Lisa's personal computer at home, her personal phone, and any documents or papers she might have hidden. Helen needed to find out where Daniel was planning to go and, more importantly, whether Lisa was planning to disappear with him. The idea of spying on his own wife made Ryan feel dirty, but what choice did he have? If he confronted Lisa now without knowing the full truth, she might lie to him. She might warn Daniel. They might both vanish, and Ryan would never get answers. Helen assured him that law enforcement would eventually get involved, but right now, they needed solid evidence of where Daniel was hiding and proof of Lisa's involvement. Ryan agreed to help, though every part of him hated it. Helen gave him a small device that could copy data from Lisa's computer and instructions on how to forward emails without leaving traces. She told him to document everything he found, but to act completely normal at home. He couldn't give Lisa any reason to suspect he knew. The next week was the hardest of Ryan's life. Every morning, he kissed Lisa goodbye and told her he loved her, all while knowing what she'd been doing. Every evening, he came home and asked about her day, listening to her casual lies about meetings with clients and boring legal paperwork. At night, when she fell asleep, he would carefully go through her things, photographing documents, copying files from her laptop, and searching for clues. He found the second phone on the third night. It was hidden in her car, tucked under the spare tire in the trunk. Ryan's hand shook as he turned it on. The messages between Lisa and Daniel were intimate and detailed. They talked about their future together, about the places they'd visit, about finally being free from their old lives. Daniel called her pet names. Lisa responded with heart emojis and talked about how much she missed him. Each discovery felt like a knife twisting in Ryan's chest. He forwarded everything to Helen, then carefully put everything back exactly as he'd found it. He became an expert at covering his tracks, at acting like everything was normal while his world crumbled around him. On Thursday evening, Ryan found something that changed everything. While Lisa was in the shower, he looked through her purse, something he'd never done before in their entire marriage. Inside, tucked into a hidden pocket, was a handwritten letter. It was from Daniel, dated just 2 weeks earlier. Ryan's eyes scanned the words, and each sentence made his blood run colder. Daniel wrote about their plans, about how excited he was for their new life together. He mentioned specific details about leaving the country, about the accounts he'd set up, about how they'd finally be free from all the stress and pretending. But what made Ryan's heart stop was the date Daniel mentioned. Next Tuesday. In 5 days, they were planning to leave. Daniel wrote that by next Wednesday, they'd be on a beach somewhere warm, drinking expensive wine and celebrating their successful escape. Ryan sat in his car outside the coffee shop, staring at his phone. He just sent Helen the photo of Daniel's letter, and within seconds, she called him back. Her voice had an urgency he hadn't heard before. She told him to come immediately to a different location, a hotel conference room downtown. She said there were other people who needed to meet him, people who could help stop whatever Lisa and Daniel were planning. When Ryan arrived at the hotel, Helen was waiting in the lobby. She led him to a private conference room on the 3rd floor. Inside, a man in his 60s sat at the head of a long table. He had gray hair, sharp eyes, and the bearing of someone who was used to being in charge. Helen introduced him as Robert Palmer, the owner and CEO of Riverside Industries, the company Daniel had stolen from. Robert stood and shook Ryan's hand firmly. His grip was strong, but his expression was sympathetic. He told Ryan he understood how difficult this situation must be. Robert explained that Daniel hadn't just stolen money from the company. He'd stolen from Robert personally, from the employees' pension fund, from people who trusted him. Robert had built his company over 40 years, starting with nothing, and Daniel's betrayal had hurt him deeply. But seeing Ryan's pain, Robert said he realized this situation had created victims beyond just his company. Helen spread out all the evidence on the conference table, the photographs, the bank statements, the emails, the phone records, and now the letter about Tuesday's escape plan. Robert looked through everything carefully, his jaw tightening as he read the details. When he finished, he looked at Ryan with genuine concern. He said something that surprised Ryan. He talked about how Daniel had a pattern of doing this, of finding vulnerable people and using them. Robert revealed that 3 years ago, Daniel had been engaged to Robert's daughter. They'd been planning a wedding when Daniel suddenly broke off the relationship with no real explanation. At the time, Robert had been relieved because he'd never quite trusted Daniel, though he couldn't explain why. Now, looking at the evidence of Daniel's crimes, Robert wondered if his daughter had escaped something terrible. He suspected that Daniel had targeted her to get close to the company's finances, and when that plan failed, he found another way in. Then Robert said something that made Ryan's stomach drop. He suggested that Daniel might have targeted Lisa specifically because of Ryan. 2 years ago, Ryan had inherited a significant trust fund from his grandmother, something Lisa knew all about. The timing of when the affair started, just a few months after Ryan received his inheritance, seemed coincidental. Robert gently suggested that Daniel might have researched potential targets, found Lisa, and seduced her not just for her legal knowledge but because of Ryan's money. Ryan felt like the room was spinning. Was it possible that everything, the entire affair, had been calculated from the start? Had Daniel chosen Lisa deliberately, knowing she was married to someone with assets worth stealing? Helen added that she found evidence suggesting Daniel had researched Ryan before ever approaching Lisa. There were traces of online searches about Ryan's firm, his family background, and his financial status. Helen then laid out her plan. The FBI had been contacted and was now involved in the case. They tracked the airline tickets Daniel had purchased. He and Lisa were booked on a flight to the Cayman Islands on Tuesday afternoon. The FBI planned to arrest them at the airport before they could board the plane. It was a clean solution that would ensure neither of them could escape or destroy evidence. But Helen offered Ryan a choice, and it was a choice that would haunt him. He could wait until Tuesday and let the arrest happen, never telling Lisa he knew anything. This would ensure maximum evidence and prevent any chance of them fleeing early. Or he could confront Lisa now, this weekend, and try to get answers directly from her. Helen warned that confronting her was risky. Lisa might lie, she might warn Daniel, or she might do something unpredictable that would compromise the investigation. Robert watched Ryan carefully as he struggled with the decision. After a long silence, Robert spoke quietly. He said that if he were in Ryan's position, he'd need to hear the truth from his wife's own mouth, not through evidence, not through investigators, but face to face. Even if it complicated things, even if it was painful, Robert believed Ryan deserved that closure. Helen reluctantly agreed but made Ryan promise that he'd tell her immediately after the conversation so they could adjust their plans if needed. Ryan drove home that evening with his heart pounding. It was Friday night, and Lisa would be home from work soon. He stopped at their favorite restaurant and picked up takeout, the meal they'd had on their first date years ago. If he was going to have this conversation, if he was going to end his marriage, he wanted to do it in a way that acknowledged everything they'd once been to each other. When Lisa arrived home, she seemed surprised and pleased to see the dinner he prepared. She kissed him and commented that they hadn't done something like this in months. She was right. They'd both been so busy with work that their relationship had become routine, predictable, distant. Ryan wondered if that distance had pushed her toward Daniel, or if Daniel had deliberately created that distance. They ate dinner making small talk about their weeks. Lisa talked about a difficult case she was handling, and Ryan realized she was probably lying since she'd been too busy with Daniel to focus on real work. After dinner, Ryan brought the envelope from his car. His hands were steady now, resolved. He made his decision. Lisa was loading dishes into the dishwasher when he placed the envelope on the kitchen counter. She turned and saw it, and her smile faded. She looked at the envelope, then at Ryan's face, and something in his expression must have told her everything. Her face went pale. She didn't ask what was in the envelope. She didn't pretend confusion. Instead, she slowly dried her hands on a towel, pulled out a chair at their kitchen table, and sat down heavily. "How long have you known?" she asked quietly. Her voice was shaking. Ryan told her about Helen, about the photographs, about everything he discovered. He watched Lisa's face as he spoke, looking for guilt, for remorse, for some sign of the woman he married. What he saw was fear, shame, and something else he couldn't quite identify. Then Lisa did something Ryan didn't expect. She started talking, not defending herself, not making excuses at first, just talking. She told him that Daniel had approached her at a charity event almost 2 years ago, an event Ryan had skipped because he'd been working late on a deadline. Daniel had been charming and attentive. He'd asked about her work, her interest in art and music, things she loved but had let fade away as her legal career consumed her time. What started innocently became coffee meetings, then lunches, then something more. Lisa admitted that the attention had felt good. For the first time in years, someone was interested in her thoughts, her opinions, her dreams beyond just being a lawyer or a wife. Ryan had been so focused on his architecture projects that she'd felt invisible in her own marriage. That didn't excuse what she'd done, she said quickly, but it explained how it started then. 6 months into the affair, everything changed. Daniel revealed his plan to steal from his company and asked for Lisa's help. When she refused, shocked and scared, Daniel's charm disappeared. He showed her photographs he'd secretly taken of them together in compromising situations. He had recordings of their conversations. He threatened to send everything to Ryan, to her law firm's partners, to the State Bar Association. He would destroy her career and her marriage unless she helped him. Ryan listened, his emotions swinging between anger and doubt. Was this the truth? Or was this another lie? Lisa continued, her words coming faster now. She said she'd been terrified. Daniel had trapped her completely. He'd used her legal knowledge to structure the offshore accounts and money transfers. The money that appeared in her secret account wasn't payment for helping him. It was evidence. Daniel had deliberately made it look like she was a willing partner so that if anything went wrong, she'd be the one who'd take the fall. Lisa sat at the kitchen table with tears streaming down her face, and Ryan stood across from her, trying to process everything she was saying. Part of him wanted to believe her story about being trapped and manipulated, but Helen had shown him evidence that seemed to contradict this version of events. There were emails where Lisa seemed enthusiastic about their plans. Messages where she talked about their future together with excitement, not fear. Ryan pulled out his phone and showed her some of the evidence Helen had gathered. He showed her the emails discussing offshore accounts and tax havens. He showed her the messages where she and Daniel talked about tropical beaches and new lives. He showed her browser history from her computer where she'd researched countries without extradition treaties with the United States. How did she explain those things if she was being blackmailed? Lisa's face crumbled. She put her head in her hands and sobbed. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red and defeated. She admitted that Ryan was right to question her. The truth, she said, was more complicated than simple blackmail. Yes, Daniel had trapped her initially. Yes, she'd been scared. But somewhere along the way, something had shifted inside her. The fear had mixed with anger, with resentment toward her own life, with a desperate desire to escape everything she'd built. She talked about their marriage in a way that cut Ryan deeply. She said that over the past few years, they'd stopped being partners and had become more like roommates, who occasionally spoke to each other. Ryan was always working late, always focused on the next project, the next deadline, the next achievement. When Lisa tried to talk to him about feeling lonely or wanting to spend more time together, he promised to change but never did. She'd started feeling like she was just part of the background of his life, not someone he actively chose to be with. Ryan wanted to defend himself, to argue that he'd been working hard for their future, for the life they'd planned together. But he couldn't deny the truth in her words. He remembered all the dinners she'd eaten alone, the weekends he'd spent at the office while she found things to do by herself, the vacations they'd planned but postponed because of his projects. He thought she understood, that she supported his ambitions. But maybe what he'd seen as understanding had actually been her giving up on them. Lisa continued talking, her voice barely above a whisper. She said that when Daniel showed her the escape plan, when he painted a picture of a different life without stress or loneliness or feeling invisible, part of her had wanted it, not because she loved Daniel, though the affair had become real somewhere along the way, but because she wanted to feel alive again. She wanted to matter to someone. She wanted to be seen as more than just a convenient partner who kept the house running. While Ryan chased his dreams, she admitted that she convinced herself she deserved happiness, even if it meant lying and stealing and destroying everything. She blamed Ryan for her choices, used her resentment toward him to justify the terrible things she was doing. In those emails Ryan had seen, where she seemed excited about their plans, she genuinely had been excited. She'd let herself believe in the fantasy Daniel was selling, a fantasy of freedom and adventure and being important to someone. But now, sitting here with everything exposed, Lisa said she could see clearly what she'd really done. She hadn't been escaping to something better. She'd been destroying something real because she was too afraid or too proud to fight for it. She'd let a con artist manipulate her weaknesses and her unhappiness into helping him commit serious crimes. And she'd hurt the one person who truly loved her, even if imperfectly. Ryan felt his anger mixing with sadness and guilt. He asked her the question that had been burning inside him since Helen first showed him those photographs. Did you ever really love me? Or was our entire marriage built on lies? Lisa's answer came quickly, and the pain in her voice seemed genuine. She said she loved him deeply in the beginning. Their early years together had been beautiful. But love wasn't enough to sustain a marriage when the daily actions didn't match the feelings. She said that over time, their love had faded into habit and convenience. She tried to tell him she was unhappy, that she felt disconnected from him. But he'd been too busy to really hear her. That didn't excuse her betrayal, she emphasized. Nothing excused what she'd done, but it explained how she'd become vulnerable to someone like Daniel. Someone who made her feel seen and valued in ways she'd stopped feeling at home. Ryan sat down across from her, suddenly exhausted. He thought about all the nights he'd stayed late at the office, telling himself he was building their future. He thought about the times Lisa had suggested they go for a walk or watch a movie together, and he'd been too tired or too focused on work. He'd taken her for granted, assumed she'd always be there, never imagining that neglect could push her into someone else's arms. But even as he acknowledged his failures as a husband, he couldn't get past the magnitude of her betrayal. This wasn't just an affair. Lisa had helped steal millions of dollars. She planned to abandon their marriage and disappear to another country. She'd been living a double life for nearly 2 years, lying to him every single day. Even if he'd been a perfect husband, would that justify what she'd done? Ryan pulled out his phone and called Helen. He explained that he confronted Lisa and that she confessed to everything. Helen asked to speak with Lisa directly. Ryan handed over the phone and watched as his wife explained everything to the investigator. Lisa told Helen she wanted to cooperate fully. She provided all the information she had about Daniel's location, his accounts, his plans. She'd testify against him. She understood there would be legal consequences for her actions, and she was ready to face them. After the call ended, Ryan told Lisa what would happen next. The FBI was planning to arrest Daniel at the airport on Tuesday. With Lisa's cooperation, they'd have enough evidence to ensure he went to prison for a long time. As for Lisa, Helen had explained that cooperation might help reduce her sentence, but she would still face charges. She'd helped commit a serious crime, and there were consequences for that. Ryan also told her that their marriage was over. He couldn't continue being married to someone who'd betrayed him so completely, regardless of his own failures. Lisa nodded, accepting this without argument. She said she understood and that she didn't deserve his forgiveness. She asked only that he might someday understand that she hadn't done this to hurt him specifically. She'd done it because she'd lost herself somewhere along the way and had made terrible choices, trying to find something she thought was missing. That weekend was surreal. Lisa stayed in the guest room while they waited for Tuesday. They spoke little, moving around each other like ghosts in the house they'd once shared happily. Ryan found himself looking at old photographs, remembering better times, and wondering when exactly everything had started falling apart. Had there been signs he'd missed? Moments where he could have changed course if he'd been paying attention. On Monday evening, Lisa packed a small bag. She'd be meeting with the FBI and Helen the next morning to prepare for Daniel's arrest. She'd provide them with every detail she knew, and then she'd face whatever legal consequences came next. Before she left the room, she turned to Ryan one last time. She thanked him for listening to her, for not simply hating her. She said that losing him hurt more than anything else that was about to happen, and she'd spend the rest of her life regretting the choices that had brought them to this moment. Tuesday morning felt like moving through a dream. Ryan went to work but couldn't focus on anything. He kept checking his phone, waiting for news from Helen. She'd texted him that morning to confirm everything was in place. Lisa had spent several hours with the FBI, providing detailed information about Daniel's plans, his offshore accounts, and the steps he'd taken to steal and hide the money. With her cooperation, they had everything they needed to make a solid case. The arrest happened at 2:15 in the afternoon. Ryan was in a meeting when his phone buzzed with a message from Helen. "It's done. Daniel arrested at airport. Didn't resist." Lisa cooperating fully with agents, Ryan excused himself from the meeting and went to his car, where he sat alone and let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for weeks. Helen called him an hour later with more details. Daniel had arrived at the airport alone, believing Lisa would meet him at the gate as they'd planned. Instead, FBI agents had been waiting. When they approached him, he looked genuinely shocked, clearly having believed until that moment that his plan was working perfectly. They'd arrested him without incident, and he was now in federal custody. The search of Daniel's belongings revealed he'd been planning to betray Lisa too. He had a second set of tickets to a different destination under a false name. He'd intended to take Lisa to the Cayman Islands and then abandon her there, disappearing with all the money while she took the blame for everything. Helen told Ryan that Lisa had been manipulated by a professional con artist, someone who'd done similar schemes before under different identities. This information didn't change what Lisa had done, but it did confirm that she'd been targeted deliberately. Daniel had researched Ryan's family, his inheritance, and his lifestyle before ever approaching Lisa. He'd specifically chosen her because she was married to someone with money, and because she had legal expertise he could exploit. The entire affair had been calculated from the beginning. Over the following months, Ryan watched from a distance as the legal process unfolded. Daniel was charged with embezzlement, fraud, identity theft, and a dozen other crimes. Investigators discovered he pulled similar scams into other states under different names. His real identity was still uncertain. He'd been using false papers for years, possibly decades. The man Lisa had known as Daniel Carter wasn't even his real name. Lisa cooperated fully with prosecutors. She provided evidence that led to the recovery of most of the stolen money. She testified about how Daniel had operated, how he manipulated her, and how he'd structured his crimes. Her testimony helped build a case against him that was virtually airtight. In exchange for her cooperation and evidence that she'd initially been coerced, Lisa received a reduced sentence of 3 years in a minimum security facility. Daniel received 22 years in federal prison. The divorce was finalized while Lisa awaited sentencing. Ryan had expected it to be bitter and complicated, but Lisa made it simple. She signed over everything without argument. The house, the cars, their savings, everything went to Ryan. She said it was the least she could do after destroying their life together. Their lawyers handled most of the communication, so Ryan and Lisa barely spoke during the process. Ryan took a leave of absence from his architecture firm. He couldn't focus on building designs when his own life felt like it had collapsed. He spent his time in therapy, trying to understand not just what Lisa had done, but his own role in their marriage's deterioration. His therapist helped him see patterns he'd ignored for years. His tendency to use work as an escape from emotional intimacy. His assumption that providing financially was the same as providing emotionally. His inability to truly listen when Lisa had tried to tell him she was unhappy. These realizations didn't excuse Lisa's choices, but they gave Ryan insight into how their relationship had become vulnerable. Love wasn't something you felt once and then took for granted. It required daily attention, active choice, genuine presence. He failed at those things, and while Lisa's response to that failure had been terrible and inexcusable, his neglect had created the opening for someone like Daniel to exploit. Helen checked on Ryan occasionally during those months. They developed an unexpected friendship. She'd seen many cases of betrayal in her career, but something about Ryan's situation had affected her differently. Maybe it was seeing how a good person could be blindsided by someone they trusted. Maybe it was recognizing that relationships were fragile things that could break in ways you never expected. Whatever the reason, she made sure Ryan wasn't alone through the worst of it. They met for coffee every few weeks, and Helen shared stories from her other cases. She'd been a private investigator for 20 years and had seen human nature at its worst and best. She told Ryan about cases where betrayal had been straightforward and cases where it had been complicated. She helped him understand that life was rarely simple, that people could be both victims and perpetrators of harm, and that healing meant accepting complexity rather than searching for easy answers. Ryan slowly started rebuilding his life. He returned to work but with new boundaries. He left the office at reasonable hours. He stopped taking work home. He made time for friends he'd neglected. He took up hobbies he'd abandoned. He started really living instead of just working towards some future moment. When life would supposedly begin, about a year after Lisa's arrest, Ryan received his first letter from her. She wrote from prison, describing her days and her thoughts. The letter was full of apology and reflection. She'd had a lot of time to think about her choices and their consequences. She understood now how fear and unhappiness had made her vulnerable to manipulation, but also how she'd allowed that manipulation because part of her had wanted an escape. From taking responsibility for her own life, Ryan read the letter but didn't respond. Lisa sent more letters over the following months, and Ryan read each one but remained silent. His therapist suggested that he might eventually want to respond, not for Lisa's sake but for his own closure. But Ryan wasn't ready. Some wounds needed time before they could even begin to heal. 2 years after that night when Helen had walked into his office, Ryan stood in front of his completed downtown project. The building was beautiful, with clean lines and thoughtful spaces designed to bring people together. It had won awards and received praise from architecture critics. But standing there looking at it, Ryan realized it wasn't his greatest achievement anymore. His greatest achievement was surviving, learning, growing, becoming someone who could build better relationships by actually being present in them. He'd started dating again, carefully, with wisdom earned through pain. He'd learned to recognize red flags, both in others and in himself. He'd learned that happiness wasn't something you achieved through work or success, but something you created through connection and presence. Ryan thought often about that night when Helen had entered his office. At the time, it had felt like his world was ending. In many ways, it had been. But endings made space for new beginnings. The truth Helen had brought him, as painful as it was, had saved him from living a lie. It had forced him to confront not just Lisa's betrayals, but his own failures. It had broken him down and given him the chance to rebuild himself into someone more aware, more present, more genuinely alive. He'd forgiven Lisa. Though forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation, he understood now that she'd been a flawed person who'd made terrible choices. When faced with unhappiness she didn't know how to handle, he also understood that he'd been a flawed partner who neglected someone he claimed to love. Neither of them had been villains or victims, but complicated humans who'd failed each other in different ways. The woman who'd entered his office quietly and said they needed to talk alone had changed his life forever. She destroyed his comfortable illusions and forced him to face uncomfortable truths. And for that, in a strange way, he was grateful. Because living in truth, even painful truth, was better than living in comfortable lies.